Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for being with us. He was a long shot, and he knew it. In a moment, former Governor Asa Hutchinson, who ended his presidential campaign this week. First, the Sanders administration's quarrel with the Arkansas Board of Corrections. That continues, if at the appellate level. A circuit judge having ruled that the panel overseeing state prisons is in fact autonomous, that it can operate the institutions as it deems appropriate, that it has the authority to fire the corrections secretary, as it has done. And another issue in a multiple citizens campaigns, at least 4 of them, to amend the Arkansas Constitution, those petitions being thus far rejected. The state Supreme Court has agreed to expedite one of those appeals. Representing the state is Attorney General Tim Griffin with us now. General, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with the prison matter if we can. There is now a motion to vacate or at least to dismiss your appeal of the circuit court's ruling that the prison board's in charge, not the governor.
Yeah, so I can't get into all the weeds, but I'd probably put a lot of people to sleep if I got into the weeds. But here's the bottom line on the litigation. We have 2 separate suits. So on one of the suits, we are defending the state and the legislature and the law, as is our constitutional duty. In the other suit, I filed on behalf of the state for violations of the Freedom of Information Act by the board and failure to comply with the state statute that governs, very specifically governs, hiring of special counsel. And both of those are proceeding, and I believe that we have really strong arguments to make, and we're making them. And particularly, I would point out on the Freedom of Information Act, there's been a lot of talk about the Freedom of Information Act. There seems to be a lot of silence from a lot in the press who normally are outspoken on the Freedom of Information Act. We are defending the act on behalf of the people of Arkansas. And I haven't heard a lot about that, but that's a really important lawsuit that we filed.
Well, let's take the first one first, and then we'll come back to FOI. And that is that the board, under a constitutional amendment, 33, I think, board has sole authority over those institutions and can hire and fire as it will. It can open and close institutions. It can expand. And they say, the board says, that's clear.
Well, as you know, we're in active litigation on this, so I'm not going to get into the details of it here. We are doing this in court. I will suffice it to say I am meeting my constitutional obligations, and I think we've got really good arguments to be made, and we're making them in court where it's appropriate. When all of that has been litigated, I'll be happy to come back on and do a postmortem.
Or the other one, the FOI aspect. Are you defending the FOI or are you defending the administration?
No, we filed suit on that for violation of the Freedom of Information Act.
Right, the impetus behind the suit then. Well,
the impetus is a violation of the FOIA. It doesn't matter. We have an obligation in this area to represent the state when there's been this sort of violation. The other part is a statutory compliance with 702, which is a provision that governs very specifically, as I said, lays out the process for hiring of a special counsel. But again, the specifics, we're litigating that. All of it's laid out very clearly in our court filings. I would just say stay tuned on those cases.
All right. As an aside to that, although a serious aside, a number of judges and some prosecutors now are saying that the Truth in Sentencing Act, of which you were an advocate, is on track to make a bad situation worse, in the sense that nobody's opposed to turning criminals loose on the street or being soft on crime. But the state is not prepared, the Department of Corrections is not prepared to handle what is almost certain, they say, to be a significant increase in the inmate population. Your thoughts?
Well, there's no question that if you lock up more people, instead of letting them roam the streets, you need more beds. That's math. I estimated on television about probably a year ago that to handle the 2,000, I think I even discussed it on this show, to handle the 2,000 state prisoners
backlog
that are currently being held in county jails. That's 2,000 alone, okay? Just to get those individuals where they belong, out of the county jails to restore misdemeanor justice. Then, if you add for normal growth, that's at least another 1,000, because our last governor released about 1,000 or so a year because there was no room. You may remember these emergency releases.
Emergency powers.
Right. And so, you know, I estimated 5,000. I estimated 5,000. So I still think we need a lot, whatever the number is. The other thing I would say is the PROTECT Act is not all going in effect the same day. It is rolling in the coming years in terms of which statutes became effective January 1 of this year versus later down the road. So there is some rolling of that. But I don't think it's debatable that whether the PROTECT Act existed or not, we were already busting at the seams and have been. And all of the sheriffs, we've been of one voice on the need for more beds. The reality is you can't go 20 years in any state under any circumstances and fail to expand significantly your prison numbers. You just can't.
Well, on that subject, General, in many voices saying that our sentencing rate in Arkansas, our incarceration rate as a percentage per capita of population is way higher.
I've heard that. I've heard that from these voices, but many of these voices don't point out that we release them as fast as we lock them up. If you put your child in timeout more than any other parent, but you release them a couple seconds later, you've done nothing. That's what we're doing. So yeah, we put makes us feel good, I guess, in some way. It's a feel-good policy. We say, oh, we're putting them away, but then they immediately release them. What's the point?
Well, as a percentage of the population, of state population, it's still high.
Well, look, we've had...
Well, my question is, General, do you see any possibility anyway, any rationale for amending the criminal code? I realize you've just expanded. Alternatives to sentencing, alternatives to incarceration.
Well, let me just say this. If you read the PROTECT Act and don't buy into what you hear, you will see that I was and the PROTECT Act is one of the biggest proponents of dealing with non-violent criminals. In fact, the PROTECT Act requires a certain amount of time served, and it's a high percentage for violent criminals. But there is actually a 50% and only 25%, which is way below the federal system. But you have to earn your way out. The problem with parole is people are eligible for parole no matter what. If they just breathe and stay in prison, and your eligibility for parole date has, in fact, de facto, for many people, become their sentence. What we do in the PROTECT Act is we say, guess what? You can earn up to 75% of your sentence off, but you must earn it. You must earn it by going to addiction training, by learning how to be a diesel mechanic, by getting a college degree. Whatever it is, you've got to earn it. So you've heard very little discussion of that. And let me say one more thing on this, if I could, Steve. All the people who say, oh, they're against expanding the prisons, every single liberal who says they don't want to expand prisons, they've been expanding them de facto for years while they quietly allow the county jails to be filled up. So there's not a lot of credibility by a lot of the people talking here. And it is unfortunate that we have as much violent crime as we do, but the answer is not to release them in the hopes that they won't be violent again.
I got to move on. There are half dozen anyway, maybe not that many proposed amendments to the Constitution. FOI is one of them. Abortion is in the works. School spending,
sure.
And even one on paper ballots. None have been certified so far. Why?
Well,
Are you being too tough?
Well, that's not exactly true. So the measure that relates to reducing taxes on feminine products, that one has been out. I'm doing my job. This has been the process for 80 years, except for a little period of 2 years when we had it going through the State Election Commission. The state Supreme Court said the way the Election Commission process was working is unconstitutional. This 80-year process, the state Supreme Court has said, is the best way. It's a good way to do it, and they've effectively endorsed it. Here's the problem with a lot of the criticisms. So I've heard people say, well, Griffin,
well, you got to do it fast.
He approves the ones that he likes and he disapproves the ones that doesn't. The problem with that, there's no facts associated with that. We have the same process that has always existed. So here's the way it happens. So I get an email.
Quickly, General.
Yeah, I get an email. It goes through our process, and then I reply, great work, approved. We've issued 100 opinions over the last year. I have changed none of their outcomes. So the bottom line is I have approved things that I disagree with, and I have rejected things that I personally agree with. Ultimately, this is a process that amends the law for 3.3 or changes the law for 3.3 million people. It needs to have rigor, and it does. And some of the people who are listening to and reading our opinions are changing their application, and they're making progress.
Governor, I have to end it, or General, I have to end it there.
Call me
because
whatever
we're simply
you want.
out of time.
Tim, call me Tim.
Well, Tim, Colonel, General, whatever. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.